We got to talk about the Winnipeg Jets right off the bat. I mean, I know you're covering all the Canadian teams in the National Hockey League at large, but I don't think there's many people in the group chat that maybe had the Jets waking up in first place at this point of the season. I mean, from a step back, what have you seen from the Winnipeg Jets, and how surprised are you of what they've been able to do under Rick Bowness right now in the early December in first place?
And I don't mean this as a slight to Rick Bowness or the Winnipeg Jets, but they've been that team that everyone always talks about as this team in waiting, especially in Canada, always the best team in the country. And, quite honestly, they've come out flat in a lot of seasons and failed to deliver on that. So going into this season, my expectations for the Winnipeg Jets were not very high, especially with all the noise that surrounded this team in the offseason. And to see where they're at now has been incredibly impressive. And, when you watch more games and you kind of take a look at the numbers that follow this team, it's no accident that they're waking up at the top of the division today. And, the one way I love to describe the Winnipeg Jets is and it's so cliche when people say, yeah, you play a 60-minute game, but, what does that actually mean? And the Winnipeg Jets embody that a little more than other teams. And other teams play this type of hockey where, it's like, on the ice now, I need to score a goal, or I need to assert myself offensively because that's what I do. Now, when I watch the Winnipeg Jets play, it just seems like they play the same team, shift over shift, period over period. And they're really good at kind of chipping away at teams. And so you don't necessarily win the game in the 35th minute or the 45th minute, but by 60 minutes, you can tell who they're playing has just been like so bored by Winnipeg, just kind of rolling it over. And it's a great recipe because when you have a goaltender like Connor Hellebuck, who's had the season he's had, and, you have new systems in place, the way Rick Bowness has kind of structured this team, it's the right recipe for them to win games, and we're seeing it on a fairly consistent basis so far this season.
Well, and you mentioned Rick Bowness, and I mean, my God, it's like 75% of the show these days are just talking about things that he's done and how things have been different and changed. And obviously, a big part of that was Paul Maurice's return on Tuesday. But you mentioned a lot of the noise around the team. We heard some of the most interesting, damning comments from players on a team at the end of last season. They were open and honest, and it was obvious the frustration level was beyond anything that we've seen before. It has been a complete 180 right now, Frank. And I just, as someone that's played in a room, when you come off a very discouraging season, one where you underachieved, how difficult is it to get the majority of those same players to come back in a completely different headspace, buy into something new? And once you do that, how important is getting the results to continue that going in the right direction, like we're seeing right now with Winnipeg?
Yeah, it's interesting. It feels like as a player or as a group that's had a lot of continuity together. And I can tell you firsthand from being a player in the league and in the NHL and AHL, Winnipeg Jets, and you see a lot of guys stick around. You don't see a ton of turnover with this team. And as a player, like watching from afar, you think to yourself, okay, like they really believe in their guys. They bring guys in with a purpose and they give them a lot of runway there. When you look at it from the outside, you think it's a good place to be as a player. I understand there's certain challenges and hurdles that the Winnipeg market may have in recruiting players. But when you look at that from the outside, you think, okay, that's a place where I can have a little runway to thrive as a player. And, as far as the noise around the team in the offseason and the same group coming back, it almost has to get to the point where you look at it and say, okay, there's no other options for us here. Like, we're the guys that need to find a way to get this done. And, you make a couple changes internally. I know you bring in a new head coach and, you take the C away from Blake Wheeler. And for a guy like Blake Wheeler, who's been around the league a long time, is a well-respected guy, veteran guy, for him to come out and have the season that he's had, and by all accounts, it looks like he's been very positive and uplifting with this group. And I think that speaks to the mindset that you have as a player and going into a season like this. So it's surprising because you would look at it and think, well, like what's going to change? You have the same guys. What's going to change if you took a C off of someone's sweater? But I don't know, the way this group is playing, like they're kind of turning more people into believers, and they're doing that with their play, not necessarily with their MO or their reputation or their timeline for winning. Now it almost seems like they're playing with house money. And anyone who's watched the Jets for for a duration of this season knows that they're playing good hockey, and it's no accident that they are where they are.
There's been a lot of talk, Frank, about Josh Morrissey, and I know you had there's been on TSN.ca talking about if Josh Morrissey a true number one defenseman in the NHL, and I think there are justifiably questions about Josh as that elite number one defenseman. Certainly, he was the number one defenseman on the Winnipeg Jets for the last few years, but it seems like not just this season. It started last year, but he has emerged into, I mean, a real difference maker that can eat up minutes, can play in all situations. I'd love your perspective on the growth of Morrissey into what he is right now for this team on the Jets blue line.
And it's been interesting because, I've been around for Josh Morrissey's whole career, going back to those Young Stars tournaments in Penticton with all the rookies. And when I saw him come in, I saw this really skilled player, excellent skater. It almost just seemed like he was gliding all over the ice. He made everything just look so effortless and smooth. And so when you have that base, you have that skill set, that's not going anywhere, especially for a guy like Morrissey. And so now we're seeing him kind of evolve into this true number one guy who, has the points to say that he's knocking on the door to that, that elite defenseman in the National Hockey League. And I know there's always popular names, right? Like Makar, Yossi, Hedman. But every so often, every few years, there's a little bit of a changing of the guard. There's a passing of the torch. And, since Cale Makar's come in the league, we've seen him arrive and be a big time player. And, there's nothing to say that Josh Morrissey can't be that next guy, especially when he's getting the minutes that he's getting under Rick Bowness. Like, I can't tell you how many times I would see a Winnipeg power play in the past come over the boards, and thinking to myself, okay, like Josh Morrissey should be playing a minute 20 on every power play. That's your number one guy, especially since years have gone on since you've lost Dustin Byfuglien, who used to eat a lot of those minutes. And I know there's times where the Winnipeg team has won and lost, but Josh Morrissey, his command with the puck, his poise with the puck. Every time I watch him take a shot and they kind of slow it down and do a slow-mo, I'm always so impressed that this guy doesn't even look down at the puck. His head is up the entire time. So, you kind of package that up with the way the forwards on the team have delivered this season. I know it was a slow start for Kyle Connor, but when you have that base of foundation and skill set on Josh Morrissey, and you have a team that's playing with a little more urgency, a little more compete, it's a great sign for him. And I think a lot of the credit, and I know you guys have been talking about Rick Bowness a lot of the credit has to go to Rick Bowness. Like we heard earlier on how, he was talking with Josh Morrissey earlier in the season about how he can be a better player. He can be more in this league. And I can tell you firsthand, I played for Rick Bowness. He is an excellent communicator. He lets you know exactly what he wants from you. And of course, like any other coach, he's demanding, but he does it in a way that, he has a lot of respect for his players. Like sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And that's what Rick Bowness is one of his strengths for sure. So, the fact that he comes in and, he has expectations for Josh Morrissey, but maybe he's able to lay out that expectations in a way that really, really sinks in for a guy like Morrissey. That's got to play a big part of it. And I can tell you as a player, anytime a coach takes the time to talk to you on a personal level and say that, hey, I believe in you. I believe there's more to you. And this is how I think you can get there. You really catch the player's attention. And you feel like there's a little bit of a spark that ignites. So I'm not surprised that Josh Morrissey is having the season that he's had, because the skill set is there. And you add in a guy like Rick Bowness who has laid out a little more of expectations for him and does it in a way that's really gotten through and communicated well. And this is the result you get.
Frank, it's such a great point in that, we heard about, Rick calling Josh shortly after he became the head coach and said, "You're the guy we focused on when I was in Dallas. And next year, like, I'd like to see your name in the top 10 voters for the Norris Trophy." And to some people, wow, that's ambitious. But I think we're seeing he's certainly capable of it. But from a defense perspective overall, one of the things he said in training camp was that they did not get enough from their defense last year. I believe the Jets scored 20 goals from the blue line, and he wanted that to be 40 or 45 and wanted the defensemen to activate more. And part of that was getting buy-in from the forwards, which, to be honest, wasn't really there last season, to back them up. From a defense perspective, from a guy that's, maybe not Josh Morrissey, but one of the other top six, what does that sort of messaging from a head coach do? And what does that task, I guess, to activate, to be a little more aggressive, how does that affect your play and maybe your enjoyment of what you're doing?
There's a few different parts to it, right? So you can tell your group that you want more from your defense, but if your defense can't provide more, the forwards are not looking to pass the puck to the point. The forwards are not looking to get the defense engaged in the rush. Forwards are going to be looking for their own line mates. They're going to be looking for that pump, that pop pass, that bumper pass into the middle of the ice. But when you have guys like Josh Morrissey, who's obviously very gifted offensively, the guy like Neil Pionk, who's put up great numbers in this league as an offensive defenseman, there's no reason why those guys can't get more involved. And, I've been a part of teams where defensemen just hang out at the blue line, and that's it. You don't enter the zone. You're always at the blue line, and, you play very conservative. Also played part of teams where they want defensemen creating a little more chaos in the offensive zone, because anytime as a defenseman you can activate off the blue line and all five guys are on the same page, all you're doing is creating a little bit of a mess for the defensive zone team. And you know who's usually covering a defenseman? It's a winger. And wingers have a tendency to be, let's say, not the best as far as their defensive zone coverage. You have two defensemen. You have a centerman who's, well-versed in that situation. So it makes sense that you can get rolling around and kind of get wingers confused on the defensive side of things. So that has to be something that's really drilled into the team earlier on, right? And that's something that you're going to go back to training camp, right? And one of the first meetings when you're talking about your offensive zone structure and your philosophies is going to be, we want to place more emphasis on getting our defensemen involved in the rush and on offensive zone play. And this is how we're going to do it. And there's certain triggers on the ice. For instance, if you're a forward and you're coming around the net, you're going to get to a decision time around the goal line where you're going to decide, is that when I'm going to move the puck up to the blue line, or is that when I'm going to cycle it back down towards the net? The higher you get up as a forward into the zone, into that hash marks top of the circle area, now you've just skated into your defenseman. So now the defenseman has a decision to make. Am I going to dive through into the middle of the ice and try and create an opening that way? And that starts to become a little more of a high-risk game. So if you have everyone on the same page, understanding, okay, this is when we're going to get it to the defense. This is when we're going to get it to the defense off the rush. And Winnipeg has been a very good team off the rush. They've been very effective that way. For me, like when I watch them play, that's a strength of their team. They're very quick through the neutral zone. They like to attack in numbers. The next step for them, and you can see that they're working towards that. And it sounds funny to say that they're working towards something, even though they're first place in the Central Division, is turning that really strong rush play into a five-man unit in the offensive zone that gets the defense rolling around, gets the defense, engaged in the play, and having forwards that are okay with saying, okay, your Pionk are going in and getting involved, and I'm Mark Scheifele, even though, I want to hang out and grab a one-timer or get a wrist shot in the high slot, I'm okay hanging out at the top because I understand these guys can contribute, and this is our philosophy, and this is our scheme, and this is something that we do as a team, and eventually over time, it's gonna pay off for us.